Good day and welcome to the Vigilante Dialogues. I am your host, Shaina Smith Archer, inviting you into the National Boardroom. If you are new to our program, Vigilante is the Virgin Islands national motto and it means to be watchful. Our mission in this boardroom is to have dialogue or conversations about issues affecting our quality of life and how we solve them. The Vigilante Dialogues is broadcast live on Facebook and our YouTube channel on the first and third Thursdays at 7:30 p.m. and replayed on CBN Radio FM 90.9 in the Virgin Islands. Tonight, I have a few colleagues with me. We're going to be talking business, more specifically, nation building and what our economy would look like or could look like in the year 2040. I know, everyone has been hearing lately about the National Sustainable Development Plan draft that is out in circulation, and I encourage everyone to be sure that they get a copy. It's actually available on the Chamber of Commerce's website under resources if you haven't seen it as yet, so you can make sure that you have opportunity to submit your comments and questions. So with me tonight, I have my friends, Mr. Shea Alexander, Mr. Andrew Ball, and Mrs. Keiyia George is here someplace. She will pop up shortly. That she will be here with us to have this conversation. So I'm looking forward to an informative and fun conversation, guys. So welcome to the National Boardroom.
Thank you for having us.
All right.
Thank you.
I'm going to apologize in advance for some loud music I'm hearing outside. All right. So, guys, I reached out to you to talk, have a conversation, as it were, about business and not just, I guess, business in the sense of activity, but more so in terms of what is the importance of business when it comes to our economic development. Because I know a lot of times persons don't connect the two. And what I find is that, it's important to continue having those conversations and educating persons more about what it's about. So it had a few things when I was reading the National Sustainable Development Plan that stood out for me. And one was money is not the problem and money is not the solution. People are. Something else that they talked about was that the greatest national asset is our people. Having natural resources doesn't make for a wealthy nation if mismanaged. So I think it's important in terms of, when we start talking about a 15-year plan, that we take, stock of what's the current situation on the ground. We've still, as far as I'm thinking, in economic recovery mode from the hurricanes, and still we had a setback with the pandemic in 2020, continuing into 2021. And we are hoping this year that we're going to turn the corner. Now, some of the things that I've seen in the report also said that the economy grew by 5.5%, I guess, over the last 3 years or so. I can't remember the trend that it was, but I think that was the estimate that was given in terms of what it is. So what we want to do, I think, from a long-term viewpoint in terms of the vision is saying, okay, we would like to see, I would say the goal that they have, not in these words, is that we want to see more economic empowerment for Virgin Islanders. But the question now we put now tonight is really, what does that mean? And in order for the VI to continue to progress, it needs business to drive the economy, because, the economy is made up of consumer spending, investment by, the commercial interests, government spending, as well as the exports minus the imports. So it's as if to say 75% of what happens in the economy is all driven by businesses. So whether it's a company or someone who is self-employed, all of that, we're going to consider to be business tonight and the importance of it. So I'm going to put the first question out in terms of what we want to, unpack tonight is in 2040, from where you sit now, whether you're a business owner, Keiyia, you're executive director of Chamber of Commerce, as well as a business owner, that, what are your thoughts about where the economy should be in 2040? What should it look like? Whether from an industry standpoint, diversification, We hear about green economy, blue economy, those types of things. What are your initial thoughts? So I'll start with you.
Hi, good night again. Well, my initial thoughts are education.
Mhm.
Why is that? I've always been keen on if we want to plan for the future, we have to start planning from now. In 40 years, I'll be well into my 80s. Hopefully, I haven't slowed down, but I'll probably be traveling a lot. So I'm not going to be here. This is going to be my home base, but I'm not going to be here. But perhaps my children, your children, Andrew's children, Lord have mercy, y'all don't have children. But perhaps someone's child will still be here. And in 40 years, my youngest will be 44. My youngest
Mhm.
child will be 44 in 40 years. So if we don't start teaching our 4-year-olds, our 5-year-olds, our 16-year-olds right now what blue economy is, what green economy is, what orange economy is, because we have 40-year-olds now who still don't know what that means.
Mhm.
We're trying to reach them one by one, but the masses have not really caught up to what the rainbow of economies mean. And so 40 years from now, I would like to see the children that are here now, they're going to be 40 and in their 40s and in their 50s. And I would like to see that they're well prepared to take over the Virgin Islands. They're well prepared to move the Virgin Islands forward. They're well prepared to be the entrepreneurs. They understand. Yesterday we did, today's Thursday. Yes, yesterday we did our last session on BCP, the BCP template. And one of the things that I shared is a lot of people think that when the government gets the money, you mentioned that the government spending is part of our economy, but one of the things that we like to say in the Chamber of Commerce is that the backbone of the economy is the business community. And so I led that by saying, I think I was saying something about one of the things that you need to do when a disaster is hit or there's a hazard or whatnot, or you're about to go through something, 24 hours before, if we have enough time, to put your sign out. Let people know that you're still open. And it just prompted me, most of these last 2 years, what we've been hearing is that the businesses are greedy. And so what I said is, it's not that the businesses are greedy. If our businesses fail, our economy will fail. So I would like for these children who are here now to really know what that means. I would like for them to understand that they have choices, they have options. I would like for them to know that you can go to a trade school, you can go to college, and you can go and be an apprentice or a mentee or a mentor. I'm sorry. No, sorry, a mentee. And you can open your own business. We need for our children today to be opening their own businesses. I am so grateful of the young entrepreneurs who are doing that, but we need so many more people, so many more children push, let me not use the word push, encouraged to get out of the government system, get out of the regular 9 to 5 and open up their own business, even if it is a 9 to 5, but become employers as well. So that's what I would like to see. I would like to see that we start right now educating our children, educating the future, educating 40 years from now on what it means and what we want the Virgin Islands to be. And I think that is a good thing for this national development sustainability plan. I think that document should probably be spoken about in school. They should go through it. They should be tested on it, perhaps, because how can we have a plan and no one's here to implement it? Because really, the plan isn't for us.
Mhm.
The plan is for them.
Yeah.
So that's what I would see.
Okay. Awesome. Andrew, what are your thoughts? What's
Well,
it gonna look like?
I'll definitely follow on Keiya's comments as to how important education is. I mean, that's effectively our investment in our people in the future for the future. If
Mhm.
we're not preparing for that now, then we're going to get left behind. Um, for me, I'll probably focus a little bit more on tourism, just because that's sort of my main
Mhm.
area, and obviously a larger part of the economy. Our tourism is part of an international relationship, ultimately. There's not. I mean, we had our little pre-discussion about staycations, but most of our tourism is coming from outside. Um, and a lot of the workers in tourism are coming in from outside. A lot of the investment from tourism is coming from outside. Um, it's we're still adjusting here, I think, in terms of the rapid growth that the country's gone through in the last 30 or 40 years, economically, infrastructurally, uh, the whole lot. And so we're still kind of figuring out how we manage these relationships and how we make sure people don't take advantage of us as the BVI. How, but to make sure everybody gets a fair shake. Um, and so I think we need to probably make an effort to hone in on how those relationships work. I'm not a Rotarian, but I used to work for Rotarian, and one of the things that he used to say in nearly every meeting we had was, "Good business has to be good for both parties." And so, we really have to, I think, have a good effort to sit at the table and understand each other, whether that's locally, whether that's internationally. And so a real focus on relationship building, and sort of what the outside world uh, brings, what we want and what we don't want. And that's probably something that as a country we should probably define a little bit further. um, you know, we have good reason to have a fair level of protectionism here, because we do have to protect ourselves. But at the same time, that can be massively harmful to business. So we need to make a little bit of a plan as to a direction of, where are we going with this? How far are we going this? Where are we going to put limits? Where are we not? And where do we want to encourage things coming in? And I think, that again comes back to the teamwork, improving the public-private relationship, having the private sector help to inform the public sector, to get these things done. If I look at where I would like to see tourism in 40 years, um, I would like to see it mostly staffed and owned by BV Islanders, which, let's face it, right now it's not. Um, to do that, education is a key part. And some of that's not just skills, that's just about developing interest as well. Um, I'm sure we can generate some investment here, but at the same time, inward investment is not a bad thing, provided that we maintain some control here. And there's ways to do that without being so overly heavy handed that people won't invest. Um, and we need to explore that from both sides. I would love to see, in terms of tourism, a bit more focus on culture, of selling our people, selling what makes the BVI different, because we're surrounded by a bunch of islands with sand and sea, um, in the entire Caribbean, in the Mediterranean, in the Pacific. That's not overly unique. What makes us unique is our people, is our history, is our culture, and that's something that I think we should really be selling a lot more. The other side is, I'd really like to see a bit more protection for our environment. That's the other thing that we are selling. If we lose that, tourism is going to massively decline. Um, and in that regard, probably a bit more of an effort towards quality over quantity would go well. Before Irma, at least on the water, we were reaching a point where our marine tourism economy was near saturated. Arguably, the environment would not have been able to sustain that many people on the water. Um, so supply and demand kind of dictates that we could increase the quality of the offering there. Less people, more money, preserved environment. Um, so I could see the BVI becoming a bit more of an exclusive higher end destination. Not to say that there's not a market for the lower end as well, but maybe a little bit more focused towards the high end.
Awesome. I love those points that you made, and in terms of the shift that's going to be necessary. Shay, what would you add or take away?
I wanted to first clarify. Did you say in 40 years or in 2040? Because
Oh
I
yeah,
see those as two
2040. So
very
that's
different.
20 years. Andrew missed the first 20 years of
Yeah.
the 21st.
I think
I added 20 years.
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
I
That's
think
what happened.
because I'm quite the pragmatist, and I think that if you want to think about an economy in 20 years, you're probably thinking more about a transition,
Hmm.
than about the actual affected change. because you'd have to start making certain investments and certain angling into certain areas and niches that you'd want to see materialize in something like a
Mhm.
40 to 50-year period. I
Yeah.
think one of the key points that was brought up was the idea of education, and that followed through with Andrew's point of having locals and BVI landers and BVI belongers, because we do have to be very particular with those status claims, having them be a bit more involved in the economy. I think the challenge that you have there is that we have a lack of linkage, and what I would like to see start to develop over a
Mhm.
20-year period is the linkages between the economy, the persons in the economy, and the money that is made. I think there are a lot of like Chinese walls in between these spaces, and that creates a certain lack of information that results in a lack of interest. I have oftentimes a conversation with various stakeholders, particularly in the financial services industry. And something that's often said to me that I find so funny is that we have to glamorize financial services. And I
Mhm.
asked them, what do you think has to be glamorized about an industry where people get to travel sometimes once every month and stay in the best hotels and eat the best food and have a stipend, probably sometimes a daily stipend that's double what people make in a month, and have the best bags, the best cars? You don't need to glamorize that. People just need to be aware of it. You don't need to market that. The issue is a
Mhm.
lack of awareness. And that's not going to be solved in something like a 20-year period, unfortunately, because you're going
Mhm.
to have a sort of culture shift so that I
Mhm.
think somebody said the move away from government. I I'm not a part of the government is the worst place to work party. However, I am a part of people need to be aware of more options. And again, I think seeing that happen over 20 years, you're going to have to one, start with education, but two, start with a culture shift that encourages people to think beyond the regular.
Mhm.
Which brings me to my second point. I think we have become a bit too complacent, and we're starting to see that result in a lack of ingenuity. So we tend to do the same thing, which unfortunately for us has resulted in an economy or market, sorry, that is extremely narrow, and is not very diversified at all. And we call for government to diversify the economy. But as a private sector, we don't really do anything to do that. We continue to see people apply for licenses and continue to do the exact same business that everybody else is doing. But if you're cutting from the same pie, you're just cutting a smaller slice every time.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I think the unfortunate opportunity cost to that, while we continue to go into the same bag, is that there are bags that have to be bought outside. And that's such a fabulous example for me because of what I do. But there are products, there are services that people here can afford, that they have to look for outside because nobody's seeing that niche, because
Mhm.
I'm not sure that we are even aware of how to look for it. So again, when I speak of education, it's not just teaching people how to sail a boat, or teaching them the skills they need to work in a trust company. It's also teaching them to be able to think critically and think beyond the box. Because I think our education system, as it is, unfortunately, has been structured to raise 9 to 5 workers, and that is I think the reason you see the society that we have today, which again is why I'm not sure that in 20 years we can change that. But I do
Mhm.
believe in 20 years we can begin to see the culture shift that's necessary to have the sort of thinkers and entrepreneurs that can really result in a diversified economy. I don't believe that that's something that should be expected of government. I think government should facilitate it when it comes about, but I think it's going to start with entrepreneurs. So for me, again, the word linkage between private public, so that private not just informs what happens, but I think should guide what happens. I really
Mhm.
do believe, again, and I said this to someone last night, I believe that government leaders, and this is no disrespect, should be figureheads. I think the economy should run itself. Entrepreneurs should guide the economy. And government people should be able to drive around in really nice cars, sign documents, represent the people, and not have to worry about making dollars, because an economy should do that on its own. And a market does that on its own if you give it the freedom to do so. So
Mhm.
again, I don't want to sound defeatist, but I don't see what I want to see in 20 years, but I see us going down the path that's going to result in maybe 40 to 50 years in the
Yeah.
sort of economy and marketplace that we ultimately would want to have.
Awesome. All right. Anyone want to add or comment on anything that Shay said?
I do. Just a short comment. When he said he doesn't see it in 20 years, I sat back and I was like, I wonder if that's why I immediately thought 40. I mean,
Yeah.
I heard you say 2040,
Consideration. Yeah.
um, but really. it's going to take a little bit longer.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole concept of government just being a figurehead, I kind of like that.
You like that, right? I know. Yeah, I
Because
really would like that.
I'm always telling people we have to stop relying on government. I told somebody today, we're waiting on government to do this, but really the business sector is the one who's supposed to be doing it. It's the business community that drives the country, not the government.
Yeah.
They are really just there riding around in nice fancy cars and
Cut the ribbons and sign the
yeah,
contract.
and kiss
Which is,
babies. Yeah.
They should facilitate. I think is the best way to put it.
yeah. Yeah, and that for us, especially having worked in the public service and now out in the private sector, we know that government's role is really the regulator, create the policies, the legislations, and the regulations by which we as businesses know, this is basically the sandbox. This is how big it is. This
Yeah.
is what is required of you. So I have to pay my taxes to be able to do business because essentially that's what it is, eh? And as a result of that, they provide the public infrastructure, the public services, and those types of things to enable businesses now to do business. But somehow it got turned on its head in terms of the current model, I guess, that we have, and in terms of the economy, that a lot of persons believe that government is the biggest spender, I would say, in the economy, and that's not the case, because even with, if we were saying we have $1 billion economy, just rounding the figure, but government's budget is only about 400 million. So there's $600 million that's out there basically on the private sector control through various companies, small businesses, um
And the everyday consumer.
yeah, yeah, and everyday consumer that's employed by businesses.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot of education, I think, in terms of us fully understanding how it all works. And that's a good segue now into what are the challenges that we are meeting right now. And we'll talk about how to solve them. So you can actually talk about the solutions one time when you throw it a problem. I know for me, the in a nutshell, the biggest thing again is public service delivery. You know, efficiency and effectiveness is something we've heard time and time again. It's supposed to be in customer, what we used to call those things, those brochures that we did, Keiyia, a couple years ago. And these are the customer service standards, but somehow I don't know if they translated into reality fully. And we have live examples happening right now in terms of the level, or I should say the quality. That's the problem. So we have low quality public service delivery. Not to say it's the entire service, but we know exactly what we're speaking of, especially when there are certain things that affect businesses directly and indirectly that it goes. So I don't know who to start with first, because I know you all have a laundry list. Okay, Andrew. So let's start with you.
Sure. I think my main area to address would ultimately be communication. At the end of the day, but we can't move forward in a mutually beneficial way. And when I say we, I mean public and private. Let's say that could be international and local. That could be public and private. Business is about relationships, any way we slice it. And we can't move forward until we can actually understand each other, until we can understand each other's objectives, what each other needs out of the various deals that we're making. And to be honest, I don't know what it is right now, but we have these meetings, everybody talks, everybody smiles, you make action points, you make agreements, everybody walks away from the table, and then nothing happens. And it's just suffocating business. And so it's not about being able to say we had a meeting. It's not about communication. It's about understanding. It's listening, not just hearing, if that makes sense. And so we need to be able to have those conversations in earnest. I think a lot of that, the walls that are built there are based around trust. And there have definitely been, we talked about the rapid economic growth here. And we talked about a little bit about, the significant foreign influence in that growth. And there have undoubtedly been influences that have taken advantage of the situation. And so it's right that people want to protect themselves from that. But without that foreign influence, our economy is also in a lot of trouble. So we have to find a way to figure out who to trust and how to trust, so that we can have conversations and build bridges instead of walls. That I mean, certainly in my world right now, that is the biggest roadblock that we have.
Mm-hmm.
And in a metaphorical sense, it's covered in razor wire. Um, so that's my big bone, I guess, to pick. And then we can circle that back around to the idea of environmental protection, the idea of education, etc. as well. They're all important building blocks to either build for the future or at least preserve the future. Um, but right now, just in terms of maintaining what we have, and having the ability to grow, and sort of maintain our reputation so we can do that in future, that's the big thing on my list.
Okay. Awesome. All right. Yeah, yeah.
Alrighty. The word that comes to mind is good governance. And I know that's a word that's thrown around a lot, but there is something that I've already tiptoed around in my last answer that is still a prominent issue, and I'll give you a solution as well. I find that our politicians, so that's why I really like when he said just the figurehead, because to me, and when I say politicians, that's what I'm calling them. I find that our politicians, or those who are in office, or those who are elected, whatever we want to call them, right now, a lot of them are behaving like politicians. Um, but I find that a lot of them, this may sound awful, but they don't really know what their lane is.
Mm-hmm.
Good governance is knowing when to do what you need to do in your lane. So I was speaking to one of the ministers today. We were in a meeting, and I kept saying, y'all, you are, and I was like, you know what? But I'm not talking about you specifically, because I hear people come to you directly, and it's like that's not his job. Go to the PS, go to the department, deal with them directly. That's not a minister's job. And the solution would be for the ministers not to, or the politicians, the elected officials, whatever name we want to give them, not to feel like that they have to answer to everyone. Um, I don't know. I don't think I could ever be elected to office. Why? Because I don't like to play that game. I don't like to play the game of I need to answer everything that's said to me. I don't like to play the game of hold on, my son's alarm is going off. He needs to go deal with the dog food. Micah, I don't like the whole game of responding to everything, actioning everything. No, allow the service. You talked about having an efficient service. We can't have an efficient service because we don't allow the service to do their job. In my opinion, I worked in a service, and I think I remember I remember thinking I never want to be a department head. And that's not like me. Because I could tell you after a week of working in government, I asked, what do I do to get promoted? Because that's just how I was trained to always be moving forward, always be progressing, always look forward to the next step. And after a few years, I was like, I never want to be a department head here because, or in any leadership position, because you're going to be dumped on, you're going to be thrown under the bus, you're going to be blamed. And a lot of this trickles down into the behavior of the country. Why am I saying that? I'm saying that because even my child told me that if my assistant, y'all know if anybody's ever heard me talk about Shelly, I call her the wonderful Shelly. She said if she ever gets a real boss, that Shelly's not going to know how to act. And I was like, what do you mean? And she says, because you don't treat her like you're her boss. Well, I'm not, by the way, but anyhow, that's a different topic. And I said, what do you mean? And she says, you're nice. You talk to her. You care about her. And in essence, I groom her. I mentor her. I pour into her. I do all these things that I would want somebody to do for me. And I asked her, I said, What makes you think that I should treat her poorly because I'm her boss? And she says, that's just the way it is. So, what does that tell me? This is what my child is seeing in school. This is what she's seeing in her community. This is something that I have seen. And another thing that I want to point out is I mentioned that a lot of how the country behaves, and I mean outside of the public service, is as a result of the public service. A lot of the businesses are ran the way the public service is ran. We don't have audited accounts for the public service. The businesses can't give you an income statement. And this is nothing against our businesses. I'm saying that if those who have a different lane would just stay in their lane, I think 20 years would look a whole lot better. But rather, we want to play patty cake, we want to play hopscotch, we want to play double dutch. And I'm like, no, no, let's go play chess, you know? Let's go do some big children stuff if we all want to be consider our children. No, I think it's shameful. Some of the things that some of the higher ups get into, even at different levels.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I would never want to be in a position of power in any statutory body and any government office. And if I'm there, Father God, that is some scary crap. I can say crap, right? But the solution is for them to move out of the way.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to put it, move out of the way.
Yeah.
We have some very, very bright people here. Very bright people here.
Brilliant,
who,
even.
Bright, brilliant, intelligent,
Yeah.
smart. All of that is different, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
But we have some brains. We have some minds. We have, people that can change the world. Shay, Andrew, Shaina,
Mm-hmm.
3 of them are right here, can change the world if we just allow them. Shay worked at Trade. And Father God, I wish he was still there. I mean, I'm quite sure they do as well because I'm quite sure they're very, very short staffed. But I remember when he was there, and I remember thinking, I don't know who that, and I called him a kid. I don't know who that kid is, but he's bright. But what happened?
Mm-hmm.
Have we gotten to the point to where we're so concerned with our own deficiencies that we decide no one can shine? No, let's
Mm-hmm.
not be like that. Uplift each other. And another change that can happen or another solution is we have to start at the mind. We have to change our mind. And again, I always say when you really want to make a significant impact, you start with the young people.
Mm-hmm.
Education. I think education is going to be in everything that I say because if we don't reach the minds of the younger generations, we're just going to continue down this path.
Mm-hmm.
Because if my daughter can tell me that, and she's in 9th grade, if she can tell me that at her young age that I'm supposed to treat someone poorly because I'm over them, then that concerns me because that's not how I run my household.
Mm-hmm.
So that really, really, really concerns me. So those are the issues that I see. And I think I gave 2 or 3 solutions.
Awesome. Yeah, you definitely kicked over the can of worms there, sister. Jay, she sounds like she was listening to some of our conversation last night, didn't she?
Maybe she was. I don't know. Um, so I have a philosophy, which is that whoever you allow to be the problem has control. And for that reason, I always tell people when you invite me to conversations about business and the economy, there's only so much talk I'm going to have about government. Because we cannot, on the one hand, say that we want government to be figureheads and to be removed, and on the other hand, then cast everything at their feet. Because what that says is that they have power over us.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were to ask me what the biggest problem is that business faces, and this is not to say, mind you, that there is no intersection, because of course there is intersection, and you cannot do business without interacting with government and without government hopefully facilitating what you do and not standing in the way. But if you were to ask me what the biggest challenge with businesses is, I think Andrew started by saying communication, and I'll take it further. I'm not sure that we ever learned in this territory how to collaborate effectively.
Mm-hmm.
And I see that because oftentimes I find we have no idea what a negotiation looks like. And this comes from the smallest level to the biggest level. I observe it in the way that children interact with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I see it in the way, for example, that we sell land as a territory. We have no idea what a negotiation looks like. So we either come at it expecting everything, a zero sum game, either for us or for the other person. So when we sell land, for example, we tend to sell as if the land is worth nothing, and then further down the line we're upset because then it's developed and it's sold for millions and millions of dollars. Or we come to people in the public service, for example, and we expect them to give them all and pay them 20 something thousand dollars. I feel as though there's culturally and structurally we don't understand how to negotiate. And then oftentimes I see that in business, and I see that in the way that business people interact with the public service. Having worked at trade, for example,
Mm-hmm.
it's funny to me how often quote unquote business people would come in with a certain kind of law behavior because I'm a business person, you just have a 9 to 5. But I have
Mm-hmm.
to get your license in front of the director. And let's face it, there's a human element to everything that happens, especially when a human being is executing it. And if you come to me with an attitude, I'm going to work on your stuff with an attitude.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I just say that to say, again, I'm not sure that we understand how to go into a space and be a business person. So when we interact with government, for example, we want government to do everything for us as business people. They have to give us grants, they have to lower fees, they have to waive this, they have to speak at that. But nobody ever says to them in exchange, I want to do this at the school, I want to donate some computers, I want to fund some scholarships. So,
Mm-hmm.
and this again, I'm not trying to defend the government, but I'm asking where's the responsibility for the business sector? We have been existing, we have been earning money, but I'm not sure that all of us act like adults, or rather, like business people. And
Yeah.
that's reflected in the fact that we kind of just feel like we're supposed to go out there and just earn money, and it's just supposed to fall in our lap. And if it doesn't, it's the government's fault,
Mm-hmm.
or it's the fault of the people because somehow again we don't understand negotiation, so we feel as though the market is supposed to shift based on what we're doing as opposed to you as a business person structuring to meet the realities of supply and demand. I
Yeah.
start selling something, people don't like it, I go on Facebook and I rant about how nobody's supporting me because they don't like
Supported.
me,
Yeah.
as opposed to, okay, is it that they don't like this color? Do they not like this type of letter? Do they not like this designer? You cannot expect the market to restructure itself to suit you. And one of the things that I found really interesting when I was starting my own small businesses, I wasn't very popular, not as a young person, at least I know a lot of older people, and I'm very grateful for that. But when I would see people complaining a lot about people only supporting the popular, as a
Mm-hmm.
business person, your thought should be, how do I then leverage myself into that space? How do I negotiate myself into that space? I'll use an example. When I started my business, my best friend Sasha, everybody knows that's my best friend, she's very popular. So I would constantly ask her to share my things. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
going to sit and complain about not being popular. I'm not going to force myself to become popular. I leverage myself into the space. And that's a very small analogy. But on
Mm-hmm.
the bigger scale, I do not feel like we're collaborating or cooperating. We kind of just expect things to go how we want. And we expect the market to produce for us the results that we want without any alteration to our business model on our end. And I feel like you can see that in a lot of like legacy businesses. They continue to do business in the same way that they did it for 30 years. Then someone comes in who perhaps looks a bit different than us, but is equally a BVI lander, does it a lot more modern, a lot better, offers a better quality service, and they literally call trade, this is not right, this is not fair, you have to stop them. What? That's not how a market works.
Mm-hmm.
So when I say negotiate, I think the better word might be perhaps adjustment. We have to learn how to adjust and how to evolve and how to progress.
That.
And part of
Yeah.
that has to include an element of sacrifice. You cannot just go into the market and expect to get what you want. And until that happens, I think you will continue to see people going to business, relying on their 9 to 5, and the business within 3 to 5 years either closes or it stagnates to the point where they keep feeding their own money into it and it really has no economic parity, no power. It just exists.
Yeah, yeah.
So if you were to
And
ask me to sum it up, go ahead. I'm sorry. I was a
no,
bit
no, go
unplanned.
ahead. I was going to give you a follow up, but you finish it up first. Go ahead.
No, to sum it up, I think one of the biggest challenges that business people face is that they're not ready for business.
Mm,
Um, Even some of the most successful people, they're not, and because we've been in a developing economy, one of the things that come with economic bust is sometimes people just end up with a money bag in their hand. And I know that sounds like I'm diminishing the work that they've done, and I'm not trying to. But essentially, something just opens up and you're in the right place at the right time. And we see that success and we say, oh my goodness, he's such a good businessman. But as things become competitive and the monopoly fades, all of a sudden they cannot function.
mm,
And I think in many ways, what has happened with the BVI, I compare it to young people who start working in some of these high profile law firms. They start earning a lot of money and they've never really understood how to manage it.
mm,
And so the taper off effects of that are again business people who perhaps aren't really aware that business is a give and take. It's not just a take.
mm-hmm.
Especially in a developing society, you should be contributing. You should be going to the table and trying to figure out what you can do for the community as opposed to just expecting the community to spend their money with you. But that's something I'm very, very passionate about. So I'll end my rant there so as not to consume our time.
Well, I think you made some very excellent points, especially the one around the need for business education. Because, when I would have gone to school almost 30 years ago, I graduated from high school. We had classes that, taught things like stenography and keeping the books and those types of things. But the type of skills that are necessary to run a business is not necessarily being taught anywhere, as it were. And it's for business persons or persons who want to start up a business to actually take the initiative and educate themselves about these things. And we take a lot of things for granted where truth be told, people have been learning on the job, so to speak, when it
Mhm.
comes to business leadership. And in order for us to again, not just start up a business, but for it to develop and thrive, and add to the economy as you described it, that's important. So I don't know. It means then we definitely have to go back to our curriculum and look at whether or not as part of whether it's technical training, vocational training, whatever it is, that you do have courses or classes that teach these types of skills from a very early age.
These are book skills, though. These are about sociocultural interactions. This is
Mhm.
about an attitude.
Okay.
You can't really teach this. This is simply about people understanding life is not just taken.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure how I can't really offer a solution because it's very complex and it's in the psyche of the territory. But I think
Uh-huh.
if again, that I think is one of the biggest challenges that we face.
Okay.
Asking yourself as a business person, wherever I'm presenting something, what's in it for the person I'm trying to negotiate with?
Negotiate with. Okay.
Yeah.
Kiara, you wanted to add? I think I saw your hand.
He said he wasn't sure exactly how um, to, to deal with that. But how you deal with that is one of the things that we must remember that the family unit is grossly broken. Even if a family has a mother and a father, sometimes they're not available. And even when they are physically available, they're not mentally available because they've been stressed out all day at work. Let me use my family as an example. Number one, our children come first. If any of you have ever been, my son just left. You know why? He wanted to tell me, well, he was brushing his teeth. I don't know why they use my bathroom all the time, but um, he wanted to tell me good night. I think he wanted y'all to see him on camera too, but whatever. But he wanted to tell me good night, and he stood there waiting for me to acknowledge him. And I don't know if you can see my lips moving, but for me to tell him good night because that's just what he's accustomed to. How many children aren't getting that? How do we change the selfish behavior that we're seeing in what Shay was mentioning earlier? Because that's really what it is. It's just selfishness.
Mhm.
Part of it is, and I've fallen victim to this before in my professional career as well, to where I'm tired and I don't have any more to give. And I remember when I worked in this one private entity here, I remember one time, and actually I got this advice from my sister. She says, Kia, you can't give them all because when you come home, you have little people that you have to have something left to give to them.
Mm-hmm.
And when we as adults don't have anything left to give to our children, they take it from wherever they get it because they have to be filled. And I'm gonna say it again. I think this is like my third or fourth time saying this. I'm gonna always go back to, if we want to change a nation, you change the children.
Mm-hmm.
How do we change the children? The adults got to change first. The adults have to recognize I have to change my behavior because I have these young minds watching me. Our teachers have to be mindful
Mm-hmm.
of what impression they're making on these young minds. Um, our neighbors, the concept of a village. I mean, I'm not from here, but gosh darn it, I'm from the South. I know the concept of a village. I am well aware of the concept of it takes a village. I know what it feels like to walk down a road and do something, and by the time you get home, your mama know about it, and that person beat you on the way home, and you got to beat him when you got home too. We call it whoopings. We ain't call it beatings, but we all know what a whooping is. Um, so being here, honestly, it feels like home. Perhaps some years behind, but even so, it feels like home to me. And
Mm-hmm.
after one of the things that my husband always reminds me when I'm making comparisons, he always says, like I'll be like, I've never witnessed this at home, and he'd be like, you spent most of your adulthood here. So what are you comparing it to? You've
Mm-hmm.
only been an adult here.
Yeah.
For the most part, I've been here since I was 24. I've been here a long time.
Yeah.
So 24, my mind was young, ripe, and still I thought I was exposed. I traveled many places, traveled the world, seen many things, hit many continents. I thought I was well exposed, but I still had life to live. So how do we change that, Shay? We change that by we have to get back to mentoring
Mm-hmm.
the young people. We have to get back to apprenticeship. Um, a lot of times we don't have time for that either. We don't have time for apprenticeship because oftentimes our business is already short staffed, which means those who can do it are stuck doing so many other things. They don't have they right now. I got a letter at the chamber from the commissioner at labor, and I don't know if y'all remember, but labor was doing the program where I forgot what it was called, but in essence, it was employability. I think that's what it was
Mm-hmm.
called.
Mm-hmm.
That program over with in conjunction with HLSCC and perhaps UE, but there was another entity that was dealing with this as well. And the program is done. And so now I have this long list of people who went through the program who need an internship. And I'm looking at the list and I'm looking at what people are interested in, and I'm looking at how far they got through the program, if they were able to complete it, and whatnot. And I sat down and I was like, how am I going to tackle this? Because I know these people who are not young people, they're probably all in their 20s and up. I
Mm-hmm.
know they need an internship. I know they need somebody to take them under their wing and show them the way. I know this.
Yeah.
How am I going to find them? Nobody has time for this anymore. Everybody's busy, especially after two Category 5 hurricanes, flooding galore. It just seemed like it just wouldn't stop, and a pandemic. And a pandemic.
Yeah.
No one has time because we're too busy right now playing catch up. We don't have the staff that we used to have because we can't afford it.
Mm-hmm.
We may not be offering the service, or we may be offering way more service than we should because we can't afford not to. And now I gotta take on Shay, who don't know nothing about coding, and teach him how to code. What
Mm-hmm.
time am I have to do that? I don't have the time for that.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a ripple effect going on right now that at some point, the Chinese wall that I think it was Shay mentioned, or Andrew, which one?
Mm-hmm.
The Chinese wall needs to go
Yeah.
around this wave that's hitting the Virgin Islands so that it can be stopped. Because if
Mm-hmm.
we don't stop it, it will be 40 years from now, and we're still going to be having the same conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, and that would be scary, at least for me, because a lot of times, again, we having those conversations about thinking that things are just actions to fix. But what I'm hearing from you guys most of the night now is about it's all with the mindset. How do we perceive things? Because again, I know when in school it used to be about, keep your head in the books, go to college, come back, get a good job. It was never about, do educate yourself, but also not just want to be an employee, but about an employer. So you're not just giving yourself a job, you're looking at employing other people and the importance of that to your wider society in terms of providing employment. So I think you guys have really come at this from a completely different angle than anyone might have expected in terms of, again, some of the tangible problems that we have. Let's say, for example, whether it's work permit processing, trade processing, is all about how we perceive what the roots of these problems are and seeing the solutions, in terms of fixing them and getting things trending in a different direction, I would say. And the money is going to take care of itself, essentially, is what I'm hearing you guys saying, once we put the right things in play. So one problem I think we've all heard. Yes, Shay, I see your finger.
I just wanted to say something really quickly because I think to tie the two things together, and this comes back to the idea of taking and not giving. I remember it happened like maybe twice during the busiest season because like, again it's no secret I used to work at trade, and because of the fact that licenses are renewed on the calendar year, trade
Mm-hmm.
had what we refer to as a busy season, which started around middle of November and went into the end of January because everybody had to be kind of consumed with just simply the work of renewing licenses. And I remember there would be oftentimes not business people themselves, but like agents, like I know myself, persons who would liaise between the businesses and trade, oftentimes like law firms, sometimes like management companies, things like that. What they would call and ask the department or ask of someone like myself, how can I make this process easiest for you? Because what I would like to do is to come in and get these in a day. However, I know that that's probably very difficult. So
Mm-hmm.
again, how can I make this easiest for you? No, I am not saying that business people have to do government's work for them. However, what I'm saying is that the idea of collaboration does sometimes have to involve how can I make something better? Because as a government worker, I remember how terrible it would feel knowing that I can't speak for anybody else, but I was given X amount of time and I would have to go home every afternoon and read these posts about how terrible government workers are and how inefficient we are and how we're the worst people in the world. And oftentimes, these same business people had some of the worst customer service at their institution. So it was just like, what are you even talking about? And most of the time, I'll say this too, a lot of the time when business people complain about departments like trade, it's because they didn't get what they want, as opposed to there being an institutional flaw. But just to wrap the point up and to make it again, I think we have to get to the point of just like you said, a challenge must have a solution and you should offer it.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you cannot offer something to the issue, to remediate the issue, then your awareness of it is almost moot, it's pointless. It's just going to make you miserable, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
So I, and I just saw a comment flash up there, but I'll just leave that alone so that we can move past it.
Well, I'm actually gonna have Andrew comment on it. I think I know what the person is saying. What's your thoughts?
In terms of the comment that just came up, the
Mhm.
problem with government being reactive, not proactive.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think a great example of that actually is in the marine sector. What's happening right now is a whole lot of enforcement on
Mhm.
some very short notice. Now, the argument would be made that a lot of this is based around law that has been in place for almost 20 years,
Mhm.
but it was never enforced, and the business community adapted to that status quo.
Mhm.
Um, to change the way that an entire section of our economy operates within 2 weeks is
Mhm.
simply not going to happen, and it has massively disrupted business. So I'd say a prime example of that is that it's not that there's an issue with enforcement; it's that there's an issue with the law, and the law worked when it was written 20 years ago. That's probably why it wasn't enforced, is because it didn't work. Um,
Mhm.
But so now we've been reactive because some other people have sort of pointed out that we're not enforcing our own laws. Whereas we could have been proactive, had a healthy private-public conversation, and built laws that work for both parties before
Yeah.
any of this ever happened. And that's not leveled at this particular government. That's leveled at previous governments as well. The biggest fear that the industry has now is that there will be some attempt to adapt these laws again, and zero conversation with the industry before it happens, which
Yeah.
again leads to change leads to adverse effect anyways. But change is generally supposed to be good. The laws are there to regulate the industry, make sure everybody's safe, make sure everybody's compliant with our international obligations, and obviously generate the government some revenue. Nobody has any problems with that, but it's still got to work for the private sector as well.
Yeah.
It's a lot of this is actually really, really easy to solve if there is a conversation happening. And to Shea's point about, there's got to be an exchange. There actually, last year there was a letter of intent tabled with government from the marine industry, which had a whole portfolio of educational programs, environmental programs, employment programs, and all it really said is, okay, let's do some stuff together which will help the community, and it will help us. We'll have to work together on it. It's not a massive cash outlay, but we'll have to work together on it, and through that, perhaps we can generate some better trust of each other, so we can move on to bigger things, and we can also then sell to our inward investors that the private and the public sectors work together. This is a good place to invest. You can put your money here and feel confident about it. We had a great meeting about it. Everybody was very positive about it. We emailed it out to everybody in caucus, and never heard another thing about it. So again, that there's got to be some follow up there. There has to be some collaboration there. And so effectively right now what's happening, and it's not just the marine industry, this is just my example because it's what affects me. But
just before you proceed with that point though, because I'm hearing it come up all night. So my question then would be, if there have been offers, because again, your example of the marine industry isn't anything new. I've heard of other examples, even from persons in the diaspora that might see opportunities, for the country, whether it's economically or socially, but there hasn't been reception to it. So I'm interested in, thoughts from anybody. Why is that? It's almost as if, and I guess this kind of segues into the next question I had in terms of what kind of public-private partnerships should be fostered. Because, Shea, I think, summed it up very nicely in terms of saying it's all about collaboration. So whether it's even collaboration amongst the businesses, and then across the board, no, in terms of public and private. Why does there seem to be a competition that I am not aware of happening between the public service and the private sector, that we butt heads more than saying, hey guys, we all about the same goal, more or less on the same team, because we're in one country. It's not as if I have a private sector country and a public service country. We're all in the same country, and should, I think, have the same vision and be able to move this forward. Because again, we could have a 15-year plan, but my fear or concern is that because the relationship, the working relationship that needs to exist between the public service and the private sector is not as holistic as it ought to be, because there are pockets of, some work well better than others. But in terms of the whole entire attitude, why is that? Where did that come from? I don't know if you guys could shed some light. Andrew threw up his hands.
Honestly, I've been asking myself this question for the last couple of years. If I had the answer, I would have fixed it by now.
Yeah. Keiyia, you had anything? Any thoughts on it? And you just went
Am
dark.
I still in? Okay. Everything went dark, so maybe I disconnected a little bit. I was going to tie everything that Andrew and Shea said together because that's really what it is: communication and collaboration. Mm-hmm. Then if you think about the fact of Sorry, my children are preparing for bed and they're a little behind schedule. But if you think about the fact that that there's a you use the word competition, there is this dire need to come over in somebody else's lane. Sometimes I wonder. I've never run track. I don't like running, but I do know the rules. You're supposed to stay in your lane. The only time,
Okay, Shay, you want to jump in there?
I don't know if there's a competition. I think that there's a disconnect. And I think that the reason there's a disconnect is because connection doesn't just happen randomly. Connection has to happen over shared values
so sorry.
or shared vision.
She just got her hair done and by her other sister, and she wants me to tie it up for her.
Okay.
I guess I'm the only person that could do that. But there is this god awful need to show up people far too often. Far too often. There will never be good communication. There will never be collaboration if we can't learn to work together. I said earlier, we have a lot of bright minds. We have a lot of brilliance. We have a lot of intelligence. We have people who can think on their feet. We have some very analytical people. We have engineers. We have all types of people. And I use the word engineers because engineers are typically very analytical people. I'm an engineer, very analytical, too analytical. But why can't we work together? Why is it that I have to be buddy with someone who has to run for this position every 4 years? Why can't the service, the public and the private, just come to a realization we need each other? Some of the things when I'm in these meetings with, again, not department heads, not PSs, but ministers, is why are you doing this? It's not your job. Put the policy in place. Give it to someone that doesn't have bureaucracy to get it done. It's not about putting another notch in your belt. It's not about your legacy. I wasn't here when Stout was around. I wasn't here. But I heard about him. How many bricks did he lay at that college himself? I don't know. Shaina? Any?
I haven't heard of any.
Hold on. I'm not hearing you and I don't know why. My earbuds died.
Oh.
Say something?
We're here.
It's dead. I'm gonna go out and come back in, okay?
Okay. Okay, Shay, so that's why she cut you off because she didn't hear us. All right, so finish your point. Hopefully she hear us talking. But I think in terms of what you were saying, the disconnect, I really like that point. And actually somebody just popped up something here. So I'm gonna have you
I was just gonna ask if you could put his point up because I think that was exactly where I was trying to go with it.
Okay.
For connection to happen, there has to be something to connect over. So in family units, you connect over. Well, I'm not a psychologist. I can't pretend to figure out what those attributes are. But I think for the public and private sector to experience harmony, there has to be something that they share. And presently, the Virgin Islands sort of is ambling along because we don't have a long-term strategic plan. So, for example, a group like the BVI, CCHA, BVI Finance, the Department of Trade, the Premier's Office, what is there for them to connect over beyond very arbitrary ideas of serving the people and wanting the best for the economy? What is there for them to connect over? Because the Premier's Office is going to sit down. And I think this is where, again, we have to be a bit more tolerant of the various views that people have, because there's nothing really to expect them to be kumbaya around because nothing exists. So the Premier's Office is going to sit down and they're going to have an idea, for example, for the financial services industry. And then BVI CCHA hopefully is going to have their idea. BVI Finance will have their idea. The various trust companies have their idea and trade will have their idea. And so I think what you might perceive as competition is in fact everybody probably just trying to do their best, but their best is not in unity. So then
Mm-hmm.
there's a clash. We do not have anything around which persons can actually come together and say, okay, and I think I used this example with you when we were speaking last night. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's not going to interpret it in the same way, but if you say, for example, having locals within positions in 20 years is a priority, then in some way BVI should reflect that in whatever small way. In some way, trade should reflect that. For
Mm-hmm.
example, on trade side, it might be starting to demand internships with the hope that in a couple of years, those interns then become senior managers. BVI finance might I mean, it's very difficult to come up with these examples because I'm not in these spaces. But I
Yeah.
think I'm hoping that the point is clear. There is nothing really for people to come around. There's no campfire to draw
Yeah.
around. So we're
Yeah.
all walking around with sticks, poking at whatever we think is an obstacle. And unfortunately, what we're
Mm.
thinking is an obstacle sometimes is somebody else who's trying to do the exact same thing.
Yeah. So it's friendly fire. Friendly fire.
Yeah, yeah.
Are you referring mostly to the public service in that, Shay, or are you referring to the private sector as well?
I'm referring to everybody because you will actually find that within the private sector, there are similar disharmonies. For example, some of the volunteer groups say that they find they're all doing the same thing
Yeah.
and
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't make any sense. So this is not this is, and I think that is what I'm trying to do. Well, sorry, that was very controlling of me. I was going to say that's what I'm trying to do in this conversation. But what I personally am trying to avoid is the idea of an economy being reduced to just government
Mm-hmm.
and a couple business people because there are a lot more factors at play.
Yeah.
And I think these disharmonies they experience across the board. This is not just about one industry and the way that it interacts with government. This is broad.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
It's
think
everybody.
I think a lot of that roots from we all need to agree on where we're going, right? And I know
Where
Shane
we
loves
want to go.
we need a plan, right?
Yeah.
And it's up to the BVI as a whole to inform that plan, not the government specifically.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's the government's job to enable that plan and sort of help keep everything on the rails to achieve that plan. That and obviously make it will need to adapt over time.
Yeah.
Uh, but if the government changes the key roles of the operating officers, be it permanent secretaries, department heads, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
as politics change, and not just the politicians, which are really should probably be focused on policy, not on operations,
Yeah.
then there's no continuity, and the plan just gets thrown out the window every 4 years in lieu of another plan.
Yeah.
Um, and I would venture to use the word corruption on that, not in the sense of the sort of devious theft type corruption. I mean, and I've just looked up the second definition here. Uh,
Uh-huh.
Change or debase by making errors or unintentional alterations, and it's we keep changing the plan, and it's undermining the effectiveness of the machine that is supposed to be delivering our success.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's such a key thing because I was saying to somebody the other day that the public service is the one thread, so to speak, through election cycles, right? So if they're, again, as Keiyia said, if they're allowed to do what it is they've been tasked with, essentially delivering public services, the policy and the strategy part of it is really what I think has been missing. And as you said, Shane, there's nothing threading us, so to speak, to say, well, this is what we're trying to achieve. It's like you go into a game and obviously everybody trying to, the team's goal is to win. And the point guard, the forward, the center, everybody has a role to play in that. But as Keiyia said, if the point guard starts to play center, you're gonna have a problem with this game plan. So we have to see now that the importance of having that game plan in a national sustainable development strategy, whatever we want to call it, that these things are very key to us being in a different place in the next 20, 30 years. So basically in a generation, the children and the grandchildren will be able to say, yeah, definitely we've made strides in the developing of our country. Because the word developing country really just, I smile at it, because at what point do we stop?
Every country's developing all the time.
Exactly. So it's something where we fall into these global traps of categorization, I would say, that almost limits our thinking in a way, because you're thinking now, oh, I'm behind, I'm trying to develop, and it's like, no, it's really about you setting your goals and your targets and saying, hey, this is where I want to see your people, because again, a country is about the people in the next 30 years. That if one generation didn't have access to a particular opportunity, that the next generation coming is being prepared, it's being set up to ensure that when they come, they are better off than the previous generation. And I think that's all anybody really wants to see at the end of the day. But we somehow have missed it through all the developing, is what I would call it. But definitely election cycles don't help. I agree with my friend Gary on that, because the leadership, I think, is also the thing that politicians are leaders of both, of the community, of the entire country. So whether it's a public service or the private sector, these are the people that we're sort of looking to cast a vision, to say, hey guys, this is what we're trying to accomplish. And we want the buy-in, both from public service as well as the business sector, or the private sector, as we will call it. Because I think sometimes we leave out like your churches and the other NGOs that are part of the private sector in a way, that have a role to play also in moving the country forward. So we have to change that mindset. Sometimes I refer to it, we gotta come off the plantation, because it's like we're under this kind of thing that there's some limitation preventing us from going to the ultimate limits in what it is we want to do. So, but I think we tackle the idea of public-private partnerships in a different way. But that was one of the questions that I had, and it starts off with, as you guys have said, there needs to be we need to have the connection around a common vision, and that there be more of a collaborative spirit. And we do acknowledge that we're not, the private sector isn't trying to show up the public service. But I think the attitudes, as she mentioned, is like, there's so much criticism that people tend to get defensive with the first comment. It's like you're not stopping to listen to see, well, if this is something I can actually take as feedback and make my process better or improve on what it is that we're doing. But we defend what it is we've been doing for the last 25 years and say, well, this is what we've been doing for the last 25 years, so it has to be good, because of some type of longevity. So Andrew, you had a point, and then I'll pose the next
No,
question.
I was really just going to reinforce that using your sports analogy, in the sense that we have to find a way to acknowledge that we're all on the same team.
Mhm.
And the only way we can do that is to define the objectives more clearly and say, look, we're both on this end of the field, we're both playing in that direction, or we're all playing in that direction, so let's do it together.
Yeah.
But right now the objectives are so obfuscated,
Yeah.
I think, that everybody's shooting for something different, and it's mostly in the same direction, but people can't even understand that much, because we can't have that conversation and understand each other to say we're on the same team.
Yeah. Yep. Sounds good. Keiyia, I saw your hand, and then you could also comment on this comment.
Okay. So yeah, I wanted to finish the thought that I had, which is actually what Andrew said when I was talking about HL Stout, never having to lay a brick, and I was going to tie it to sports, and
Yeah.
I don't know what's going on with my devices, but what I was going to say is a basketball coach doesn't go out there and shoot a hoop.
Mm-hmm.
He coaches his team. And I think our coaches should coach and let the players play. Because when the coach gets on the court, it's chaos. So
Mm-hmm.
let me read this. I believe that one of the fundamental issues is that we are trying to run a country with blunt tools while the cutting edge tools are laying on a shelf in a report. And it's not just the report that it's laying on. It's a report. It's a what was it, the paper you said earlier, Andrew?
Oh, and the proposal that they put
Yeah,
forward.
Well,
but
we did a letter of intent, yeah.
a letter of intent. It's all of that. Um, and I think Shay said it earlier, doing things the same way.
Mhm.
It's always work. What's the need to change? Well, your tools are blunt, boo boo. It's
Mhm.
time to sharpen them. And if we don't sharpen our tools, our children, they will become blunt edges as well. So,
Yeah.
you want me to
Awesome.
read that too?
Well, I guess this was kind of like part two of what he said before. The systems need to be revamped to meet the needs of our country.
And there's a reason, Shayna, that countries have 10 and 20-year plans.
Mm-hmm.
Number one, anything beyond 20 years is just too far. And anything beyond 10, or even 5 years in some cases, but 10 years that's not looked at again is too far as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, but at 5 years, you should be really doing some serious assessments of what your plan says.
Mm-hmm.
At 10 years, where are you? Does the plan need to be completely revamped, or can you just make some fine tuning and tweaks to it here and there?
Yeah.
So these plans can't be a blueprint for a building, because the blueprint, you build it, that's how it's going to be built.
Mm-hmm.
The blueprint for the country has to be one that can change and be. I remember when we were building our house. We told our contractor we want some storage space underneath the house. He adjusted. He's not supposed to, but he adjusted. That's what we have to do. We have to say, we need some storage space.
Yeah.
Go to the blueprint and make the adjustments. Taken, because he took everything in mind. He didn't just adjust, he didn't just add, some more layers of bricks, blocks. He adjusted the pipes. He adjusted, I don't know, all that stuff.
The
Shayna, you do
electricals and your flooring and all of that fun stuff. Yeah.
everything. And then I remember another change was we wanted our first floor to be a little higher.
Mm-hmm.
Again, that's another adjustment. You don't normally do these when you're building something, but you would normally do this for a country. And so we can't stay in the old ways.
Mm-hmm.
In the years, I remember when I lived here about 5 years, how different it was from year one to year five. It was completely different. And so looking at this country, if you look at it every 5 years, it's as if it's a whole different place that you're living. It just keeps morphing. That tells me it wants to grow. The country wants to grow. Think of the country as a human body. It wants to grow. So
Yeah. Yeah, we having a lot of comments, a lot of them agreeing basically with what we're saying because it's something where again the economy is kind of like the outcome, the process that we need to put in place, the systems, the procedures, the policies, all of those are things now that really are where the levers, so to speak, have to happen. And it's not just about projects, that happen to pretty up the infrastructure, because of course those things are important. But there's a lot of other things that need to be put in place. I know for me, one of my biggest frustrations working in the public service was the lack of value, I would say, that was placed on plans and the importance of, let's take a week or two, brainstorm around what it is we want to do, figure out the best way to do it, not just the first idea, but the best way to do it and what's needed in terms of whether it's people, it's money, and then move forward. Because when I see things like, labor department is short staffed, it's like that should never be the case, because you understand departments like labor and trade are so pivotal to your economy because they support businesses. That's the long and short of it. But of course, we're going to think about Treasury Department being the most important. But if you want to start to prioritize the service and the need for always, what we call it, continuous improvement. So like, you were saying, Keiyia, every 5 years as a example, we should always be looking at, okay, so we're doing it this way. What new technology is available that we can use to enhance this? How can we move forward? I mean, things like electronic payment should not be anything that we're struggling to do. in terms of paying for public services in a more efficient and effective way. And the pandemic and the hurricane keep teaching us the lessons, and somehow we're not responding quick enough, I would say, to make sure that we address some of these concerns. So that's where it is that lands us at. So guys, the last question I had was, how do we groom the business leaders for 2040? And I think you guys did touch on this. I don't know if you want to add anything um to that in terms of the process of education, the need for it to be now in our educational systems, and also the culture that needs to foster it. Because I don't know if it was you, Shay, was somebody gave me an example in terms of people's attitude, even with our young persons, that we have to be so careful with, that all the bad habits, that they see, the veteran business people doing, they adopt, and they're like, oh, well, this is what you have to do to be in business in the BVI. And then when you have a handful now that don't pay Social Security and NHI, and on the report in the work permit process, the whole community now as business gets labeled, and that's a bad thing. So how it's like, how do would we want to make sure we break those cycles and make sure that it's the positive stuff that moves forward, and we make it harder for people to do the bad stuff, because then all of us get called greedy and bad people, basically.
Well, I'll jump in there. We do it by what the chamber's doing. You start a program and you stick with it. It must continue. This on and off thing, it won't work. There has to be some stability in anything that you're going to do, especially for our young minds. So like the chamber is doing young entrepreneur program. Why? Shane, I know, when I stepped, almost as soon as I stepped through the door, it was all about young entrepreneurs. I remember one of the other directors was talking about apprenticeship. It's been a rocky 2 years, but it's coming. Why? Because I see the value in that. I see some things in the more mature businesses that I don't want to continue in the younger generations. I've heard some people talk about, I've never heard the term, so forgive me if I say it wrong. Is it doing your business from your pocket? Is that the term? Pocket business? You don't have a bank.
Oh, you don't have a bank account, and it's basically you put it in your pocket.
Well, they called it something.
Oh,
it had a name. Maybe it's pocket business or something, but that was something that I am keen on especially when I'm dealing with a business and they're about to start. I always say, you have your bank account open? And if they tell me no, what are we doing? Where are you putting the money? I always ask them, do you have a spreadsheet? Even there are these young girls, I forgot the name of the area, but Cake Pop? No. Anyhow, these young girls are up the hill. Oh, I don't want to get them wrong, but I went and did an interview of them, like 5 little girls, for a magazine. And I asked these same little girls that same question. So, I'm just wondering, how do you know how much money you make? And one of them, her name was Nagessi. I'll never forget her. I love her, by the way. She says, oh, my mommy showed me how to put everything in an Excel spreadsheet. I said, oh, so you have a spreadsheet? She said, yes. I said, so, and they're teaching her. That's what you should do. Kaylee is the youngest member of the chamber. Kaylee Smith, Shaina's niece. I asked Kaylee that. Kaylee was in the office yesterday, actually. I didn't ask her then, but I'm always asking Kaylee, when you make money, what do you do with it? She said it goes back into the business. Kaylee is expanding. She wants this, she wants that, she wants this. By the way, if you want to sponsor Kaylee, she's looking for sponsors to help her keep her booth at the Pier Park, FYI, plug in. But these are the type of questions that I ask her, because I want to make sure that these young minds, that these young entrepreneurs are starting on a solid foundation. If we start them on a cracked foundation, the foundation will crumble just like it is right now.
Yep. I'll continue. Shay, Andrew, any thoughts in addition to what you guys have had me stated for earlier?
I got a little bit of a different way of approaching this, I guess. I'm going to answer your question with another question, because you posed a question specifically about business leaders.
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking about people in the top positions, helping to define and lead where we're going, in our growth, in our development.
Yeah.
Um, Pretty hard to find a business anywhere that isn't competing internationally these days, especially with COVID, and the digital economy. The world has just gotten so much smaller. Even the local retail shop is now competing with Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if we want to bring ourselves up to that standard, there's certain parts of that. I'm going to use the word education, but I'll come back to that in a minute. That we can't expect to deliver entirely here, because we're still a small place. Small place. We're constrained in that way, um, just economically even. And so, at some point, I think for business leaders, there has to be an opportunity to go out and get some experience out in the big wide world and see what the difference in perspective is. So at the
Mm-hmm.
very least, you can make an informed comparative analysis of your competition. Um, and my question is, we have people that do that now, but from what I understand, most of the people that go away to do this stuff don't come back.
Mm-hmm.
And so, how do we solve that problem? How do we get people off the rock to go see the real world, learn things out there, and bring it back here? Because that's why we're investing in those people to go and do that, right? How do we? I mean, you can't force people to do it. That's basically false imprisonment, right? So
Mm-hmm.
how do we deliver the incentive to come back? And that's a genuine question, because I don't know the reason that they're not coming back. I mean, maybe we just need to go to these people and poll them and say,
Mm-hmm.
why didn't you come back? And see
Yeah.
what the common denominators in that are. But we need to be able to, if we, it sort of goes back to where we started at the beginning of the night, in terms of, we need some of the outside influence. We need things that are not here,
Mm-hmm.
but we would like to empower that locally. So how do we go and get that and bring it back without just losing what we send to go get it?
Shay, how do we stop the brain drain?
So first thing, and no offense was taken, but I don't live on a rock. And I'll explain why I said that. I live in the British Virgin Islands, and we have, despite the fact that we have a twin pillar economy and that has its deficiencies, we have, again, I'll use the example that I'm a bit more familiar with. We have a financial services product that is renowned worldwide, despite the fact that we are a speck on the map. And the reason I feel that's necessary to say is that oftentimes, and this is about this is about socioeconomic status in a lot of ways, and making sure that opportunity is available for everybody. Oftentimes conversations are brought up about young people functioning in a certain way, and then what they'll say to someone like me, who they imagine to be, I suppose, polished and articulate and whatnot. Well, you have traveled. That's not really true. I traveled, but I know a lot of young people who traveled way more than me and in much more quote unquote enriching ways than I did. A lot of my travel was around like my sister's health and things like that. So we weren't out on the street of Condado learning to speak Spanish and whatnot. And the
Mm-hmm.
reason that's important for me to say is that I think we have to sort of shift the paradigm and understand that the Virgin Islands itself is enough of an incubator. You don't really have to go somewhere, especially in the 21st century, where you can sit and speak to someone in Wuhan, China,
Mm-hmm.
on FaceTime. You don't really have to go anywhere. A lot of what I learned about business, a lot of what I learned about a lot, basically everything I know, I learned right here in the British Virgin Islands. In fact, in the last 3 years, because of COVID, a lot of what I've learned, I learned right here at this desk in conversations quite similar to this with persons who were all locally raised and locally bred. And well, we use the word bred, which I find so strange. But born and bred, be Vedanas or whatever the case is, or persons who now live here. So I
Yeah.
say that to say, I think there is enough enrichment to be found and exposure to be found right here in the BVI. And you'll
Mm-hmm.
find that a lot of people actually come here because both our tourism industry and our financial services industry are so dynamic that they are places to learn from. I think what has to happen more And this is something I find quite awkward to say because I am privileged in the sense that I, I, my experience has been that I have I think the look that people feel comfortable in young people. So I'm
Mhm.
offered opportunities to sit in dialogue like this. I'm offered opportunities to be in certain spaces, to learn from certain types of people. And young people who perhaps are much more brilliant than I am are left on the wayside because they have their hair in cornrows, or they perhaps are not from a family that's as well connected as mine is. So I think what has to happen is we have to be a bit more deliberate about passing knowledge down,
Mhm.
and we have to understand that the only way to really build legacy is to pass something on. I have benefited from a network of people who are a lot of them are not my family, who just decided they were going to teach me. And so a lot of what I know because of them. I would really, for example, give kudos to people like Lana Smith, finance, and Sharon Flax Brutus, tourism. Every time I have a question on either of those matters, I call them. And I'm not telling people to go ahead and call them no, but we have to start having a lot more conversation because that is really how you learn. And I'm not saying that travel is a bad thing. I'm not saying that international exposure is a bad thing. But I'm saying that I think we have to shift the paradigm
Mhm.
and understand anybody is able to learn, especially in this 21st century. So what I would like to see in terms of building the sort of long-term leadership that I think we're after, one,
Mhm.
I think veteran business people and veteran public servants, because again, this is a broad scale issue, have to become more deliberate about succession planning, but even less formally about simply passing knowledge down. If
Mhm.
you make over $60,000 a year, you have a responsibility to have lunch with at least one young person every 2 weeks. If everybody were to simply do something like that, you would see the BVI in 20 years start to be the BVI that we want to have. Because the knowledge is there. It's there in different pockets. And
Yeah.
what young people offer is a chance to aggregate knowledge as opposed to having it in the chamber and in the Marine Association and in Shayna's business. But then Shay, at whatever age he is, has all of that collated and
Mhm.
contextualized to the century he's in and the time he's in, and he's able to really drive forward. But I think, again, we're all kind of operating in our own little spaces and somehow expecting that magical leadership is going to emerge in the form of young people or in the form of the next hot social commentator or in the form of the next perfect politician. And that's never going to happen. The
Yeah.
business leadership that we want, we have to groom it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think just to end on this, going to the very, very rudimentary, one of the things that has to happen is our education system, and this is across the Caribbean, needs to stop looking for regurgitation and instead look for application. Because entrepreneurs do not regurgitate, they contextualize and they apply. And
Mhm.
what we tend to favor, unfortunately, in the BVI education system, and I have seen it for myself, is students who you tell them, I don't know, you give them a poem and they repeat it back to you and they can tell you every single detail of the poem. That's not really important. That's just memory. Computers have memory. What we
Mhm.
need now is application. So that's probably what I would end by with for tonight.
So the issue though in terms of what Andrew brought up, because I understand where he's coming from in terms of a brain drain, where there are many persons that say, for example, in my generation, that when they went off to college, they basically have not returned. Um, Andrew and I know some of the reasons why, because somehow when they've gone off and now added value to themselves, when they come home, they are like they literally can't compete with um I don't know if it's that the word is the competition is the word for it, but it's kind of like saying if you had somebody that went off, they come back and they now are um I remember my example with like say they had studied veterinary science, and somehow we decided we can't pay them basically what they were commanding in another market, and I know that's part of the challenge. So instead of us saying, well, we need to up our game and offer our own, competitive packages, we rather see them go back into another man's country to build it. And I know of several examples of that being the case where somehow persons that need to make these decisions in terms of allowing or making room. I don't know if it's just even making room, because somehow we just not placing value on our own the way we would go out and recruit an expatriate to hold the same position, and they have the same qualifications as one of our own. And I have a serious concern about that because it's still happening up to today. When I first came home, it's similar. It's like, you come home making $2 and then they want you to work for 50 cents. And the excuse used is, oh, this is the public service. And I'm like, this is where we really don't place value on our people. So I hear the talk now of a salary review, but it shouldn't be that the way that that's going to be viewed, if they do it like how they traditionally done it in the past, it's going to continue to be flawed. Because really and truly, your public servants probably should be some of the best paid country in the best paid people in your country, because that is where you need some of your most brightest minds to run the country, because that is what they're doing. But we see it as being paper pushing in some instances. So we don't see the importance of saying that you pay your engineers, you pay your architects, just as much as you're paying possibly a department head in another area, because the work and the value that these people bring are, is very important to moving things forward and where it's at. So we have to definitely change that mindset of devaluing, what sometimes what we have. Because I have a pet peeve right now when I look in the public service and I see so many persons on contract, when I know that we have persons that are either within the department that, as you say, Shea, with some succession planning, they'll be ready for those posts in 2 years. But somehow it's like, whether it's the favoritism sometimes that kicks in, or we just can't see past, it's as if, let me put it this way, it's as if belongers and BVI, Virgin Islanders and belongers preferred doesn't apply to the public service, but it applies in the private sector. That's how it's said, right? When they're hiring for jobs, they say Virgin Islanders and belongers preferred. So that should apply to the public service too. But I don't know. They didn't get the memo. All right, guys, we got to wrap up. We went way over time, but I did not want to cut the conversation because I think our audience tonight really got a lot out of, when we talk about nation building, when we talk about our economy, when we talk about business, that, it has to come from different angles and different approaches, and not what we would typically think of if we're really going to move the Virgin Islands to that next level, and leveling up. So, Shea, we'll start with you and then come around in terms of closing comments.
I thought that's what I just did.
You can say good night.
Well, I mean, I think to close, what I would want to say is that there's a lot of potential in the British Virgin Islands. And I think for the last, as long as I've been what I like to call kind of intellectually mature, so that's kind of understanding what's going on, civil maturity, understanding what's going on in my society and so forth. As long as that has been my mental state, there has been a doom and gloom being prophesied, which is that the BVI is going to crumble, our twin pill economy is going to crash, and we're going to be the poorest country in the Caribbean. I'm not really sure that that's going to happen. I think what might happen is that we might continue to stagnate. We might not reap the fruits that we could reap. And yes, we might start to bleed money in a way that's very, very detrimental for the economy. But my point with that is really just, I think that, again, we need to shift the paradigm. We need to start approaching opportunity. One of the things that really took me through COVID, when COVID was very frightening, apart from the fact that one of the businesses I run that people told me was going to crash because of COVID, it did a lot better. And that's a different conversation about being able to read your market. But one of the things that really took me through is that I have a friend who works in tourism. She works in property management. And she manages some of the most, in fact, the company is called Exclusive, some of the most exclusive villas on Virgin Gorda. And I remember her approach to the situation. And that was that if this is what the economy wills, then we have to start altering. We have to start shifting. I think in the BVI, for some reason, we are change averse, and naturally human beings are, but we take it to a new extreme. And I think when we are able to shed that burden and really start thinking about how do I adapt to the circumstances, because unfortunately, we will never be on the scale of Russia and China and the United States in that we can really shape the global economy. But what we can do is come up with the best software and ride that wave until we're rich. So I really just want us to start thinking in ways that are more progressive and reflect evolution in a much more dynamic way than we are now. I think when we do that, a lot of the problems that we tend to focus on, like government inefficiency and politicians being corrupt in both ways, I think those things will start to fall off because those things are really symptomatic. They're not the actual problem. The problem is the culture and the attitude that exists. So I still have a lot of hope for the BVI, particularly if I think we put the focus that we need to put on our young people, including the ones that we don't see as future leaders. Okay? But that would be my closing thought. You're still muted.
You're on mute there.
I am very much muted. I'm sorry. So, so I was saying thanks for your contribution and thanks for being here. I know you really gave people a lot to think about. A lot. Andrew?
Yeah, I guess I'll keep it short. We need a plan that is informed by everybody. Everybody has to rally together as one BVI. And we need leadership that has the confidence to delegate and stick to the plan rather than ego. And it's really quite simple in that regard. We've all got to get together. We've got to learn how to work together. We've got to decide where we want to go, and then we've got to focus on getting there, and that's it. Yeah. But that all starts with an actual conversation in earnest. And I think tonight has been a great way to at least give some talking points to the start of that conversation.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Definitely. All right. Thank you for that. Mrs. Jackson-George.
Well, I am following two great speakers who have pretty much said it all. When Shea started to talk, I'd already started formulating what I was going to say, which was it can only get better. I'm a very optimistic person. A lot of people laugh at me because of that, but I only see greatness. There is a lot of hope. We have a lot of people, we have a lot of emerging leaders to take the reins and run with it. I'm optimistic. It could only get better. We are hitting a rough patch right now. Rough patches can be smoothed out. When I said the word rough patch, I thought of not that I grew up with snow, but hitting a snowbank, and if you know how to control that, you won't skid out.
Yeah.
So it's a patch. Control the hit, and you won't skid out. So there's hope. I'm hopeful.
Awesome. Yeah, and if history or history has taught us anything, and our forefathers, in terms of the many rough patches, rough seas, rough everything that they have persevered through, that we now with more tech, more knowledge, hopefully we have the same wisdom that we're able to basically level up, as the young people say, to do what's necessary for our country. So I do hope that all our audiences tonight have learned something in terms of, again, wanting to be a part of more conversations about how we are developing our country and what, priorities need to be brought into focus more, and where we need to go. So I want to thank my guests again for participating. I think we're going to definitely have a couple more conversations on this. I'll turn this into a series to make sure that we continue to get the message out, because it's going to take some time, as you guys said, and it's important to continually putting that information out and saying to persons, hey, think about this a little differently. This is why we need to move this forward. So this show's word of encouragement is, I found this, I didn't quote who said it, but I thought it was on point with what the intent of the conversation was. Development is about transforming lives and not just transforming economies. So again, it has to be about the people and how people are made better. Their quality of life is improved. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in on Facebook, YouTube, as well as catching the conversation back on CBN FM 90.9. Like our Facebook page. If you haven't already, YouTube channel, please subscribe, the Vigilante Dialogues. And until next time, I am your host, Shaina Smith Archer, saying let's continue the change in conversation for a better Virgin Islands.